Now, following the parade, President Trump has accused the three leaders of conspiring against the United States. And in the last hour, he said he thought America should have been mentioned during China's speech. For more on this story, we're joined by Robert Kelly, the Professor of Political Science at Pusan National University in South Korea. Robert, first of all, thanks for joining us. As we said, Trump has said Xi, Putin and Kim have all been conspiring against the US. Do you think that they're being deliberately provocative here to against the US and also to the West? What's your opinion on this?
Well, I think there's a general fear or concern out there in Western strategic circles that Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran are growing together into some kind of axis. That's a sort of very common language you're hearing now, an axis of upheaval or resistance or something. I'm not sure how much of an axis it is, right? It's probably more like a gang, but there is this sort of debate out there. As for Donald Trump himself conspiring, I mean, that's very much Donald Trump's way of speaking on social media. He tends to sort of shoot his mouth off. And, it's not really clear to me that Donald Trump is thinking about these strategic issues very much. So my own sense is that's just kind of a typical Trumpian outburst. But it does kind of shadow the larger debate in the West about how much China, Russia, and North Korea are actually coordinating, specifically, for example, in Ukraine.
As we just saw as well, the post on Truth Social where he says, give my regards, it does seem a little bit tongue-in-cheek. And the Kremlin has brushed it off, saying that Trump was being ironic. Is this really the case, though? You've said that you think it's a very Trumpite thing to do. Do you think he's feeling threatened, perhaps, at this?
Well, I certainly think that in the West, right, there is this sense that the liberal international order is under pressure, not just, by the way, from these external forces, too, but also from Donald Trump himself, who doesn't seem to actually care too much for America's liberal allies, like Canada and NATO and so on. But there's this sense that authoritarian or illiberal forces in the world are rising and that they are increasingly looking to rewrite the rules, particularly of the world economy, things like trade, the IMF, the use of the dollar, right? And that is being led mostly by China. China is the wealthiest authoritarian state easily out there, right? And other powers are sort of clustering around it, right? Russia, most obviously. Russia needs China's support in the Ukraine conflict, but also sort of smaller authoritarian powers, like Iran and North Korea, right? And all of them are kind of hoping to ride this train, if you will, with China in the lead to sort of change the system to make it more multipolar. That's the language that Vladimir Putin likes to use, right? Sort of overturn the leadership role the United States has had. Again, it's not clear to me, though. I mean, you came back to Trump. It's not clear to me that President Trump really understands this stuff very much, to be honest, right? I mean, Donald Trump tends to see international relations in a very personalized way. He's friends with Kim Jong Un, and therefore we should be able to fix things. I don't think that many scholars and analysts think international relations operates like that, but Trump's view is very personalistic, right? So if he gets along with Vladimir Putin, I guess things are okay.
Let's take it away from the US for a second. This is, as we said, the first time we've seen Putin, Xi and Kim all together on this global stage. So even aside from the US, which you've mentioned already, Robert, what message is it sending to the other US allies, specifically Europe?
Yeah, so the fact that you have the three of them together is actually pretty unique. So I work mostly on Korean issues out here in Asia, and it's very, very rare for the North Korean leader to actually leave the country, right? It's very, it's risky for dictators to leave the country because they might be overthrown in a coup and they're gone. This has been a particular threat for the North Koreans for a long time. I believe this is only the fourth or fifth trip that Kim Jong Un has made outside of the country. And the fact that he's coming together with Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin at the same time, I believe this is unique. Nothing like this has really happened ever, actually, since the end of the Cold War. And so I think that's why this is getting so much media attention, or even in the West, and even like CNN and so on are carrying the big parade, because there's this perception that we're getting real alignment here, that maybe it was a gang or something a year or two ago, but it's actually increasingly coming to serious cooperation, right? And if that's true, then, as you said, Europe, I think, is probably the one that's most at threat, of course, because Europe has, a big border with Russia. Europe is on the Eurasian sort of landmass, if you will. The United States is further away, so the United States can afford Donald Trump and his sort of erratic behavior on Twitter and saying all these kinds of outrageous things. But if you're U.S. allies, for example, South Korea or Japan, right, Poland, Ukraine, if you're near these states, right, it's very worrisome if they're all cooperating. So, for example, if I were Ukraine, I would be very concerned about this, right, because the more Russia gets cooperation from North Korea and China, the more it helps the Russians win the war.
Robert, we saw this as China using it somewhat to unveil new weapons, drones, nuclear missiles and other concerns as well. How do you think the US and also the allies in the West should respond to something like this? Because it effectively is military posturing.
Right. So I think it's pretty clear at this point, and the parade, I think, makes this very clear, that the Chinese now see themselves in a direct military competition, a direct arms race with the United States, right? I mean, this is really starting to look like the Cold War all over again. There are distinctions and differences, but I think the larger framing that you have kind of a bipolar struggle between two large powers and their clusters of allies around them, and they're kind of in this competition over the rules of world order. I think that's what we're sliding towards. And it certainly seems to be how Xi Jinping wanted to present this parade and the day with these other leaders around him, that China's leading a bloc of states that want revision rather than just China alone, right? And so rolling out the hardware is a good way to do that, right? It looks like the Chinese really want to be able to go point to point with the Americans in terms of hardware. They want to have a blue water fleet. They want to have a large army, or particularly if it comes to invasion of Taiwan. They want to sort of match the Americans missile for missile, warhead for warhead. Chinese are building a lot of nuclear weapons at the moment. And so it looks a lot like the Cold War, right? Where you have sort of like this matching kind of competition. And the United States is pretty well postured for that. The United States has a lot of money and we can always build more. But the United States hasn't had a direct competitor like this since, the Soviets back in the early 1980s. This is quite new. And, I don't know if Donald Trump is up to it.
Robert Kelly in South Korea, thank you so much for joining us